There are many different types of bees in the United States and around the world. For this presentation, I will be focusing on the squash bee, the relationship it has between a certain plant genus, and pollinating habits. The objectives for this presentation are understanding how the squash bee got its name and a bit of the history of the squash bee, and that you will learn more about the squash bee's pollinating and mating habits. As you might have guessed, the squash bees actually got their name because they are so closely dependent on the plants of the genus Cucurbita, which include plants such as gourds, squashes, and pumpkins. The relationship between cucurbita plants and the squash bee is very long in the making. Squash bees have actually been in the Americas since way before European settlers explored the region, as have plants from the Cucurbita genus. Scientists have been especially interested in the past on the specialized relationship between squash bees and the squash and gourd plants. Although scientists believe that cucurbita plants can reproduce well enough without the help of the squash bees, the plants still develop specialized traits for pollination. These traits include heavy, large, and adhesive pollen grains, an adhesive stigma, a large amount of sugar-rich nectar, and a large showy corolla or petals. Cucurbita blossoms are especially vulnerable to high temperatures and direct sunlight, so they will usually close shortly after sunrise, leaving a small window of time for the squash bees to collect pollen. In a study by Hurd et al. In the article Ecology of the Squash and Gourd Bee on cultivated cucurbits in California, they kept track of when the squash bees were out in the field. They found that the bees were usually out foraging about 30 to 40 minutes before dawn and just after dawn. On the slide, there is a picture showing the number of squash bees observed throughout the day. This lines up with the assessment of the fragility of cucurbita blossoms, and that the traits developed by the plants happen to correlate well with some of the developments of the squash bees, such as their ability to fly in low temperatures and low light intensity, through a process called co-adaptation. With this lack of visual guidance, scientists believe squash bees are initially oriented by smell or their olfactory response to the plants. Previously mentioned are some of the traits of a squash bee and how they might be tied directly to a certain plant genus. However, the actual pollinating habits between the sexes, especially compared to the honeybee species, are quite interesting. For squash bees, both male bees and female bees participate in the pollination of plants and crops. When it comes to plant pollination, the squash bees are a bit more equitable in sharing the workload. Both male and female squash bees take up Blossom's sweet nectar, but only the females seek the orange pollen grains, munching on or carrying the grains and nectar back to their nest as provisions for their offspring. So while both sexes pollinate flowers, only females bring back pollen and nectar to the hive. This is somewhat surprising to me, because very little crop production is attributed to male bees of the honeybee species. In a more recent study of the same squash bee species, they determined that male squash bees, acting alone, can actually successfully pollinate a large share of yellow summer squash blossoms. The males will then spend the rest of the day and all night in the flowers, waiting until the morning to hopefully reproduce with females. According to Tepedino, the female squash bees prefer to visit staminate flowers to gather pollen necessary to rear offspring. So this correlates with the high male squash bee presence near the staminate flowers, and proves the idea that mating between the sexes increases pollen productivity. I like to think of it as a mixture of speed dating and hide-and-seek that just so happens to pollinate flowers in the process. The fact that male bees hide in squash flowers to eventually meet females to mate with is actually a way in which pollen from different flowers can be spread. All of these facts equate to squash bees providing big advantages to not only crop growers, but their own beekeepers as well. In conclusion, the squash bees have a lengthy history with the plant genus Cucurbita. Many of their traits seem specially adapted to these plants. They also seem to have a somewhat more equivalent share of pollinating than, say, the honeybees do. These bees also provide some unique advantages to those who raise them or grow crops. Even their mating habits have a positive benefit on pollinating plants. These bees are also widely suited for pollination on a large scale, in particular of plants in the genus Cucurbita.